Mental health. It's an issue that has demanded growing concern throughout the country for decades. But why has it grown to be a particular point of concern at colleges? And what makes it such a challenge at Yale?
A huge percent of students at Yale and at other universities experience some kind of mental health problems during their time here. I think it might be as high as about 25% of students. So, and then you have these statistics saying that like 50% or more of students will experience overwhelming anxiety over the course of a given year. About 35 or so percent will be so depressed that it's difficult for them to function.
Developmentally, young adulthood is a time that's known to be a key risk time for the onset of mental disorders or mental illness, mental and emotional strain. With respect to college, I think that there are specific lifestyle factors that are normative among graduate or among college students. And so these are factors like academic stress, financial strain, sleep deprivation or irregular sleep patterns, and also very specific factors like alcohol and other substance abuse, as well as things like being away from primary support groups. And when you have those factors all converging at the exact same developmental time, there's likely to be heightened emotional or mental vulnerability.
So when you're all together in a small space like this with high achieving people, especially at a place like Yale, and there's a really high incidence of putting too much pressure on yourself, experiencing debilitating stress. Chronic stress over a long time leads to feelings of defeat and depression. There you go, you have the two most common ones.
I quickly discovered that my anxiety was building up in such a way that I wasn't I was doing well in my classes, but it was just causing me way too much anxiety to perform where I was performing. And I had a really horrible breakup into my sophomore year, and then kind of ended up being like not emergency situation, but a very, very bad depression.
Clearly, college students are at a heightened vulnerability to experiencing mental health issues. Yet awareness surrounding treatment is lacking.
The data show that very few individuals, very few college students who are suffering from mental illnesses actually present to treatment. So estimates are anywhere from 18% to 35% of students who are experiencing a mental illness will then seek services.
It's something that they feel they don't have time to prioritize. They think that, what comes first is their academics, their extracurriculars, getting a job, getting an internship, all this stuff. Mental health comes next.
Because Yale has such a an environment that tends to encourage suppression of any sort of feelings or need for help, or everyone feels like they're invincible. I felt very discouraged from talking about my feelings openly.
One of the largest problems with mental health is the stigma that surrounds it.
In the worst case or most extreme case, they might think that if they do present to treatment, then it means that they're weak. Various stigmas surrounding mental health that might not exist with respect to physical illnesses.
The wellness report suggesting that over 40% of students would be afraid that someone else would find out if they sought help for a mental health problem. So that's a pretty big problem. It really says that a lot of people are ashamed of the idea that they might be struggling in some way with stress, anxiety, depression, substance use problem, an eating disorder. It could be really anything. There are some people also afraid that there would be negative repercussions if they sought help, like they might be forced to leave Yale.
I have a lot of friends that have said my family has a hard time grappling with the idea that I'm seeing a therapist, for example, a shrink as they call it. I think that, the stuff that's been published about how horrible Yale mental health is definitely terrifies people.
It's a race to see who can do the most in the shortest period of time, who can still come out on top despite all the crazy things that are unhealthy or maybe healthy that they do throughout the day. And so having that culture around made me feel ashamed a little bit to have any sort of mental health issues.
I didn't feel stigma. I was never embarrassed. I have a lot of friends, I'd run into maybe a few people I knew there and they would be really embarrassed to be seen there, but I just grew up being so open about it, and I know I'm unique in that. People always have a hard time asking for help at Yale, and whether it's in their studies or in their emotional, personal lives.
Once I made some close friends, a lot of them started to be more open with me and more willing to support me. I just had to find those friends, and it's not like I could really do that in any other space except like a select private space. I wish I was more aware of, or if there even existed, a group where everyone encouraged that sort of dialogue, and it didn't have to be with friends that, were closest to me or that I spent like years just trying to build up and acquire, so I knew that they were there when I needed them.
There are a variety of resources available on Yale's campus to help students address issues with mental health.
So the number one primary mental health resource at Yale is going to be Yale's Department of Mental Health and Counseling. So this is covered for all students. It is part of the basic plan, so you can even waive specialty coverage and you have full access to this. There's a number on the website. They do an initial consultation with you, and then they assign you to a therapist, usually within about 2 weeks. So other great resources include Walden Peer Counseling, which is run by students, for students. It's in the basement of Welch on Old Campus. And these are students who have been trained essentially in attentive listening skills and basically emotional tracking and other kinds of good techniques for making people feel like listened to and supported, but they are not trained therapists. So this is not something for like a serious mental health problem. It's really if you need to vent about something, get it off your chest, and you don't feel like there's anyone in your life you're comfortable talking to. So it's totally anonymous, and Walden Peer counselors are not even allowed to reveal their identities in public. Beyond that, there's some great resources at like the chaplain's office, especially if it's kind of like, if you're sort of more of an inclination to look for spiritual help in some way or spiritual reassurance. If it's more of like a specific problem related to, say, like issues of like gender or sexual identity, there's always like the Women's Center or the Office of LGBTQ Resources. Another thing, of course, that sometimes people forget is actually that the dean of your college is really there for you, and they will talk to you about issues that are not just academic. So obviously you can always also see a clinician outside of Yale, which some students choose to do. I actually do that right now. I see a therapist outside of Yale. But especially for students who want to do something that's covered by Yale Health and not pay extra, then that's really the best way to go.
The reputation for Yale mental health and counseling is a mixed bag, and I think it's a lot of what students know is from what they hear from friends and what they hear from hearsay. So if you have a friend that's had a good experience, maybe you'll know better things. If you've heard stories of like things not going well, then those perceptions also do stick. So it is really a mixed bag. It is an important resource, and we don't want to. And although there are things that could improve and could change, it's still an important resource.
It sucks that the only things that are being promoted are these like really negative accounts of it, when some people have had really, really great experiences. And this is not to discount their negative accounts, but like this is also just to say like I experienced it, I had a great experience, I'm still at Yale, it saved my life, and like thank God for Yale mental health for me.
I would like to encourage people to present to treatment or to try to seek services much earlier in the process, at kind of the first signal, because what we know is that early intervention is much more effective than waiting until the point of crisis. And that's the case with physical illnesses as well as with mental disorders.
It's time to continue the conversation with mental health on campus. Coming up, YTV will be investigating the pros and cons of existing resources at Yale and how we can move forward in creating a healthier environment on campus.
High ceilings, the staircase, and some of them have skylights. We're really lucked out. We have 2 couches, a fireplace. Which doesn't actually work, but a lot of lights. We're going for